Good evening. It's a couple minutes after the hour, and I'll bring our guests on. Good evening and welcome. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for a really special discussion with two right now, and hopefully three of my favorite Northwest reporters, Rocky Barker, Eric Barker, and Lynda Mapes. Before introducing them and kicking off our discussion, I want to start with a few comments. My name is Joseph Bogart. I'm the executive director of the Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition. SOS is a 30-year-old coalition of conservation organizations, fishing associations, um, orca and clean energy advocates working together to protect and restore abundant fishable populations of salmon and steelhead in the Columbia and Snake Rivers for the benefit of people, fish and wildlife, and ecosystems. This is our first webinar series in 2021. There's two more webinars as part of this series. The first is on, or the second is on, the next one is on Wednesday, March 31st, hosted by SOS's Sam Mace, and she'll lead a discussion with some others from the Inland Northwest about the Snake River Vision Project and reimagining a free-flowing lower Snake River. Our third and final webinar for this series will occur on April 15. Dam removal success stories, rivers restored, and lessons learned. And that's on the 15th, same time. All these webinars are 6 o'clock to 7:30 Pacific Daylight Time. You can take a look at our website homepage or website for additional details about the speakers and to RSVP. I'm really excited about this evening's discussion. My fingers are crossed. My notes say my fingers are crossed. The Zoom technology runs smoothly. Apparently, I needed my toes crossed too. But we'll hold out hope here for Lynda. I want to share a few logistics about this evening's discussion. We're recording this webinar and we'll make it available afterwards on our website and our YouTube channel. We've scheduled about an hour and a half. And we'll be a little bit flexible on timing depending on how things work. I think we've got both the chat box available for your use this evening, and questions can be submitted through the Q&A box. I think it's accessible at the bottom of your screen. And we welcome feedback on your experience this evening, so don't hesitate to send an email or reach out afterwards. I want to thank my colleague, Carrie Herman, for her work to organize this webinar this evening and the full series, and undoubtedly her work right now to try to bring Lynda in. Hopefully no other technical problems arise, but if they do, you can email Carrie this evening and she'll do her best to help. Turning to this evening's discussion, Representative Mike Simpson's Columbia Basin Fund, Perspectives from 2/3 Journalists. I want to welcome, for the moment, Rocky Barker and Eric Barker, and thank you both for sharing this time with us. I think we're in for a really special evening. I've been talking with Rocky and Eric and Lynda on and off for the last couple of decades, mainly around the types of natural resource related issues that we'll be discussing this evening. Lynda.
All right.
I don't know what happened. This thing is just like dead. I don't know. My Mac just died. Anyway, hi everyone.
Welcome.
Oh no, what just happened?
Lynda, you're still here. We can hear you and see you. Lynda, welcome. So good to see you. I'm in the middle of sort of just introducing the three of you and the discussion, and we'll get started here momentarily.
Awesome.
So I'll just start again. I want to welcome Rocky Barker, Eric Barker, and Lynda Mapes, and thank you all for sharing your time with us. I think we're just in for a really special evening. I've been talking to Rocky and Eric and Lynda on and off for the last couple of decades. mainly around these types of natural resource issues that we'll be discussing this evening. A couple of short introductions on our three guests. They could be much longer. Lynda Mapes is the environmental reporter at the Seattle Times. She's covered salmon in the Northwest since 1992 and won first place national and international awards for her work examining the extinction crisis threatening Northwest salmon and southern resident killer whales. Her latest book, Orca, Shared Home, Shared Waters, published by Mountaineers Books and Seattle Times, will launch this June 1st with an online event hosted by the Seattle Public Library, Elliott Bay Books, and Seattle Times. Rocky Barker is an author, writer, and producer who writes a column for Writers on the Range, a service of the High Country News. During his 43-year career, he's covered environmental issues nationally and internationally. He's written a number of books, including Scorched Earth, How the Fires of Yellowstone Changed America. His first book, Saving All the Parts, back in the 1990s, I believe, was cited for excellence by the Sigurd F. Olson Nature Writing Award judges. He retired earlier from this year as the environmental reporter for the Idaho Statesman, where he was the primary researcher for a pivotal series of editorials in 1997 that called for the breaching of the 4 lower Snake River dams in order to save salmon and save dollars. Eric Barker is the outdoors editor and environmental reporter for the Lewiston Tribune and won the 2019 Dolly Connelly Award for Excellence in Environmental Reporting. Eric wrote a series of stories about the Snake and Columbia River system that explains the complex policy decisions around the waterways. His colleague Rocky describes Eric's work this way: his stories capture the shift from the old debate of dams versus fish to the new reality of a rapidly changing energy market, a changing political atmosphere in Washington, and the challenge of climate change. Eric Barker joined the Tribune in 1997 as the education reporter and became the outdoors and environmental reporter a year later, and has been covering salmon and steelhead ever since. Taken together, these three reporters bring many decades of journalistic experience in the Northwest to this conversation tonight. The plight of Columbia Basin salmon came into focus for many people 30 years ago when Snake River sockeye were first listed under the ESA. Snake River sockeye were the first salmon listed under the ESA in the United States. And since then, there's now 13 populations in the Columbia Basin that are at risk of extinction, including all 4 remaining populations on the snake system. Our guests tonight have been covering this story for most of the last 30 years or very close to it. They come from different parts of the Columbia Basin watershed. Rocky is in the upper watershed in Boise. Eric is mid-basin along the lower Snake River in Lewiston, and Lynda is downriver on the coast near the river's mouth. They come from different communities, in the different communities' sort of politics and perspectives and economies. Their many years of experience will bring a lot of context and perspective to our discussion tonight about the current moment. And then one last thing I'll add is I want to emphasize that Lynda, Rocky, and Eric are career reporters. They're independent minded. They're always a little skeptical. They ask a lot of questions. But they don't represent any trade group or any particular constituency or viewpoint. Through their excellent writing, they have been serving the Northwest and its people and communities for decades. And it's my strong belief the Northwest is a better place for it. So thank you all for that service and contributions you've made. I want to spend a couple minutes to lay a foundation for tonight's discussion before handing the microphone over to our guests. On February 7, Congressman Mike Simpson, a Republican from Idaho, shared an ambitious proposal or concept to address a set of linked, long-standing challenges here in the Northwest, and invited its people and policymakers for feedback and help to turn this proposal into legislation and advance it in Congress. So we're seeing some of the headlines from some of the stories by our guest tonight that showed up in early February, front page articles across the Northwest. The major issue areas are salmon recovery, water quality, farmers and fishers, clean energy and transportation infrastructure. And of course, a central element that's drawn a lot of attention is the removal of the lower Snake River dams in order to restore the waterway, the river system, and reconnect salmon productively back into Idaho. Mr. Simpson's proposal is ambitious and comes with a price tag of $33 billion. You've seen the headlines from stories written by our guests. And as a last item, before we turn the discussion over to our guests for some initial comments and then discussion, we want to play the 4-minute video from Congressman Simpson that he helped to introduce the proposal to the region back on February 7th. And it provides, I think, a good context for his thinking and his intentions around this proposal.
Idaho salmon are wonders of nature, ultra marathoners that make an 1,800-mile round trip from Idaho's highest mountains to the Pacific and back, climbing 1.3 miles in altitude in the process. Our high elevation rivers and streams possess some of the coldest, cleanest, and nutrient-rich spawning grounds. But the historical plentiful runs of the Snake and Salmon rivers are no more. In 2019, just 3,763 wild adult spring Chinook salmon returned to spawn in Idaho, about 4% of the historical total, despite spending over $17 billion on salmon recovery and management. And now, while the Salmon River is raging with spring runoff, a few wild sockeye smolts are riding that wave. Another one? But when they reach the 8 slackwater pools that have replaced the naturally flowing river system, warm water, predators, and the stress of the hydroelectric turbines will kill most of them. The current system is clearly not working. So we are asking some very difficult what-if questions. What if the dams came out? What if we were able to replace the energy from the dams? What if we came up with different ways of transporting grain? What if we created new economic engines for our communities? So for the past 3 years, we've conducted over 300 meetings with smart, dedicated people on all sides of the Northwest salmon dam issue. We came to realize the complexities and challenges that have prevented the Northwest from finding workable solutions. Since 1937, 8 hydroelectric dams have been built on the Lower Columbia and Snake Rivers, providing clean, reliable, low-cost energy throughout the Northwest. Humans have adapted, producing energy, transporting agricultural goods at lower costs, and creating irrigation and recreational opportunities. But unfortunately, the salmon haven't adapted. The dams create barriers to passage and produce slow-moving reservoirs of water that imperil their existence. Other factors are also working against the salmon, including poor ocean conditions and warm rivers from climate change. My staff and I approached this challenge with the idea that there must be a way to restore Idaho salmon and keep the 4 lower Snake River dams. But after exhausting dozens of possible solutions, we weren't able to find one that could control poor ocean conditions, warming rivers, and the 4 lower Snake dams. In the end, we realized there is no viable path that can allow us to keep the dams in place. I don't claim to know what the best answer is for each sector. However, I do know that if we give the farmers, bargers, ports, BPA, and communities the necessary resources, each sector can develop a certainty and security, putting the Northwest and Idaho salmon on a path to sustained viability. Working together as a delegation and with the governors, stakeholders, and conservationists, we can create a Northwest solution that ends the salmon wars and puts the Northwest and our energy systems on a certain, secure, and viable path for decades and restores Idaho salmon. We must also not forget the Columbia Basin tribes. Their culture and heritage revolved around the return of salmon. We must make these tribes equal partners in the solution, and going forward, they must be co-equal partners in salmon restoration. I want to be clear that I'm not certain removing these dams will restore Idaho's salmon and prevent their extinction. But I am certain that if we do not take this course of action, we are condemning Idaho's salmon to extinction.
Okay. And I will add that I think there's an email address link on the congressman's website that is designed to receive input from folks from around the region. So if you visit his website to learn more, there's also a place to provide feedback to him. So what we'll do now is hear from Rocky and Eric and Lynda. I think in that order. We'll start high in the watershed and move down towards the mouth of the river. I think you all can share whatever thoughts and reflections you have about where we are and how we got here and what it means, and we'll go from a discussion there. Rocky, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Joseph. What an honor to be here with my colleagues. We all have walked along the shores of the Snake River and the Columbia and talked to a lot of people in this region about this issue. And I think one of the things that we all know is, people care a lot about the fish, about the ecosystem they live in, about the rivers. And where I started this journey, I started actually working for the Idaho Falls Post-Register, which is located way up near Wyoming, at the top of the, when you think about it, the Snake River starts in Yellowstone National Park. And so when I started covering this issue in 1990, right before the fish were listed, it was, for us, we see ourselves as upstreamers, and everybody else in the region was downstream from us. And what we were taught, I was taught as a journalist by some pretty wise people, that Idaho's interest, their first interest, is always going to be about water. And we protect our water. We recognize it is the heart of our economy. And so we've always, water was the most important thing. But second on the list, and this was taught to me by Eastern Idaho farmers who, that was salmon. They cared about the fish that swam all the way up to, 900 miles up to Stanley and up to the Sawtooth Valley. Or some of them swim about 870 miles up to the place that Mike Simpson first saw them, in Marsh Creek. And they climb something like 6,500 feet in altitude. It's a pretty amazing process, as we all know. So the thing is, we in Idaho have always seen the 4 dams for our, and I forgot, then our third interest in Idaho is the Port of Lewiston. And if you live in Lewiston, they probably look at it differently, but for those of us at the top of the watershed, it was our third, and that's how we took it. And then power underneath that. And so that's kind of how we looked at it. And that's kind of the world that Mike Simpson comes from, a Republican. a Republican who is as conservative as you could get. He was a Trump supporter, although sometimes a critical Trump supporter. But he also, and his basic issue is he tells people in our state, the reason he got involved in this first was because he got up 2 years ago at a Andrus Center for Public Policy conference to tell us that he was not going to let salmon go extinct on his watch. And he started asking people the what if questions. What do you need to be made whole? And that's where he did all of his meetings. But one of the things that he suggested right away was he was going to propose if we could take these dams out, we would have a moratorium on litigation, some kind of certainty. Now, of course, the actual language in that has not been proposed. It's a scary thing to some people, but yeah, it is to him a necessary part of this package. He has it. He's rolled this thing out, and his challenge right now is trying to get a partner in this. He has not yet gotten one of the congressmen, especially he has not gotten any Democrats who will say out loud what he has put his career on the line to say, is that if we don't take out these 4 lower stake dams, Idaho salmon will go extinct. He didn't make that up. That's the scientific analysis that has developed over the last 30 years. So now he's trying to get some partners, and that's kind of where we are. That's kind of that's my upstream view of this issue.
Thanks, Rocky. Eric?
Well, so, in many ways, Lewiston is ground zero of this debate. The dams push slack water into this community, Lewiston and Clarkston, and the farmers in the surrounding area ship wheat on those dams. So, there's a lot of economic ties to them. So a great deal of interest in it. But Lewiston also, you can't forget, every salmon and steelhead that enters the state swims right past our city, right through our city. So we have, a really vibrant fishing community, and people really care deeply about these fish. So this interest has always this issue has always had a great deal of interest in this community. And I think this Simpson proposal has kind of spurred just a lot of both skepticism and curiosity, and people are trying to wrap their minds around it. As Rocky said, everybody's trying to figure out where this is going. If Representative Simpson is going to get some help from his colleagues in the Northwest delegation, and where it goes from there. And I'll hand it over to Lynda now.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here with these 2 guys. We've been covering this together for so many decades, and Joseph, you and I have been talking for a long time too. It's fun to be the marine end of this conversation. So I actually live in Seattle. I'm right 5 miles from Puget Sound, and so I have to say a lot of my plug into this is it's about these guys, southern resident killer whales. What do they eat? Salmon, specifically Chinook. That's what they really want. Brad Hansen, super scientist at NOAA Fisheries, just came out, finally published. Brad finally published his diet survey. Scooping up orca scat for years, trying to figure out what are they eating, and even better with DNA analysis, these scientists can actually tell where the fish come from. Super interesting. For a while, they even had a tag on the back of a couple of these whales and could see where they went in the winter, which has been the big mystery. Where are they when we don't see them off in the Salmon Islands, when we don't see them right here in central Puget Sound? So between the tagging and these diet studies that have been ongoing for quite a while, we actually know quite a lot about what these whales eat. Well, the really interesting science published just a couple weeks ago by Brad told us what a lot of people suspected, which is that, you know, in the spring months when the salmon are coming back to the Columbia Snake, those whales are chowing down. They're out there at the mouth, boom, boom. I mean, they're about 50% of what they're eating is at that time of year is coming out of the Columbia system. Not the snake so much. Most of the samples they sampled the skin from, those were lower Columbia fish. Nonetheless, the Columbia, it's a funny thing, you know, we kind of forget about it. It's so transformed now with all these dams that have really transformed it into a series of stair-stepped reservoirs. It's hard to even imagine the wild river that it was when the oldest whale, L125, you know, she was born in 1930, before any of these dams were built. You know, she remembers the wild river and the abundant salmon runs. I don't know, 10 million, 15 million fish that used to come back. Man, we get excited now if we get 1 million fish. Wow. Okay, so picture these whales. This has been their food shed, you know, for 10,000 years, and everything's going great until we come along, right? And the southern residents, they live in the toughest environment. Basically, they're taking fish out of a very wide area. I mean, Brad's research definitely showed us that. But their movement, their migratory path, as they follow these fish around, is basically the Salish Sea. That's to say the south end of Vancouver Island and around the Salmon Islands and Puget Sound and the entire West Coast, all the way down to California, all the way down to the Central Valley of California. Now, when was the last time you heard someone say they were super excited they were going to go to San Francisco Bay to go salmon fishing? Not so much, right? Maybe more like a wine tour, or it's the epicenter of the computer industry, or don't really think of salmon in California anymore. But you know, it used to be second. The Sacramento River used to be second only to the Columbia. That thing was a major producer. Not anymore. I mean, the only thing that's more endangered these days than a southern resident orca is the winter Chinook runs that, you know, L-Pod still goes down to try to snag. Okay, so then they come up to the Columbia when they don't get much down there, and they don't get so much there either because those runs have been diminished. You know, they wait, they hang, they stay there quite a while eating those fish, what they can get, and then they head up to Puget Sound later in the spring and summer, early summer. And then they start being up there in the San Juan Islands later summer, trying to get the runs going to the Fraser. So what Brad has told me and has documented in his work is that what we're worried about at this point is what they call serial system failures. Well, what's he mean by that? He means that these families of whales that have these deeply patterns of where they travel and what they eat, one river basin after another, up and down the West Coast into the Salish Sea, they're failing. So what are they supposed to do? They take a fish out of a wide area. And the problem is that Chinook in particular, spring Chinook, the tastiest, biggest, yummiest Chinook in the sea, biggest salmon out there, you know, they are the most diminished. So you have this sad spectacle of a now endangered whale depending on a threatened species for its major food source. So, you know, that's what I see down here on the marine end of the situation. And so you've got an animal that a lot of people really cherish, and you've got salmon that a lot of people really cherish. And we're in a situation where there are just so many of us, and we've altered this watershed from basically the top of the watershed all the way down to the coast, including the estuaries, with, of course, an effect on the salmon that these whales need. So back to the Columbia snake and Congressman Simpson. I think the other end of this conversation that I represent is the wait, what? End of the conversation. So for 20 years, you know, I'm hearing from Joseph and the other, you know, environmental groups in the Seattle area. And of course, you know, they're all about take out the dams, save the fish. Sure, of course. all of a sudden I get this call from the chief of staff for Congressman Simpson. I have to keep looking up his name. I don't know who he is. I've never talked to him. Is it Mike? Is it Mark? Who is this guy? And they're calling me because he's going to come out and call for taking out all 4 Lower Snake River dams. Okay, this is in like December, and I'm super busy with something else. I'm thinking, never happened, not going to do it. You know, it's total fluff. Well, yeah, if a couple of weeks later it doesn't start getting serious, and then, you know, it's like super time to get this story out because the guy really does put it out there. And then my main question was, well, does he mean it? You know, is it show pony time? Once again, God knows I've seen plenty of show pony. And then it became very clear to me, honestly, in talking to him, he super means this. He's a fish nut. They're out there. I know these people for whom the salmon define Northwest. And he will tell you, he's not an environmentalist. He'll correct you if you say it. No, he's an outdoorsman. This Idaho thing, get the guys to explain it to you, but it's a big difference. It has to do with, you know, riding horses with your grandfather in the streams when you were young, and growing up fishing here, there, everywhere. And, you know, it's part of who he is. And so this is very deep. He really means it. He's a very sincere guy. He's a dentist from Blackfoot, Idaho. He started out in the city council. So he's, you know, he's just a humble person, and he has a track record. He's done some, you know, wild rodeos before, getting people to sign on from all different walks of life to major wilderness protection in a place where you'd never think that would happen. So it's not like he hasn't done this before either. And he has this amazing staff. I'm very impressed with them. They work their butts off to, you know, talk to people. Imagine that, for like years, to try to figure out, okay, fine, you know, what if, what do you need? What would it take for you to just even look at this? And that's the proposal they've rolled out. And so it's, you know, it's party time. It's basically the moment. You know, you've got the people in the chairs in Washington, D.C., the elected senators and congresspeople who have ascended to these incredibly important positions. It's the biggest clout the region has had in the Congress really since back in the day with Magnuson. So you've got the power, and then you've got this big idea, and then you have Biden, allegedly, I guess, coming out with this giant stimulus bill for infrastructure, green power, green jobs. If that happens, which it looks like could be big money, 2 trillion or so, that's what Simpson's going for. He was very frank about this with me. He said, look, if this was just us, there's no way we could get this kind of money, this kind of a package. But what we're hoping is this will be the Northwest chapter in a much larger bill with a lot of money on the table to make it work. And it's really kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity, in the sense that you've got the people there, you've got the idea, and there's a lot of this package that is stuff that's been rolling around the region forever, like needing to modernize the grid, needing to upgrade the efficiency of the grid, needing to get ready for the energy future, you know, modernizing the irrigation system so they can persist in a climate change world. I mean, this is stuff that people talk about needing to do anyway. And so now here comes this proposal to also look at how transportation is really developed for commerce and how to make that really work for the inland wheat growers. We're already seeing more and more wheat going to trains, unit trains, more efficient systems than barges. And so here comes Congressman Simpson with this idea to say, look, you know, we're kind of headed in a lot of these directions anyway. Here's a big chance, a lot of money. Let's give it a try. And I think when I reported that story, for me, the biggest surprise was calling Daryl Olson from the Columbia River Snake River Irrigators. You had growers out there producing beautiful food on incredible ground with gorgeous water from the Columbia. They never have salt problems like they do in California. Cold, clean, sweet, doesn't get better. You know, but what if you take the dams out? What happens to them? Suddenly their straws don't fit the configuration. And so the idea that you would see this train wreck coming of continual litigation on the Columbia snake system's been going on for 20 years, unending, back in the courts now, there's gonna be more. The idea that this guy from Idaho would figure out a way to put money on the table for certainty that the region could control its destiny and say, okay, time out. We're not going to do the lawsuits anymore. We're going to figure out how to end the salmon wars and, you know, let the irrigators continue to farm, just reconfigure their equipment, figure out how to do transportation right for the wheat growers, get it going with a reconfigured power grid. Daryl Olson said to me, we're not going to throw rocks at it. If the delegation's on board, we're there, because as he said to me, it's decision time. It's judgment day, which was kind of a nice thunderbolt way to say it. So I'll just stop there. Here on the marine end of the conversation, it's a very different picture. Washington has always had the sweet spot here, right? We have the dams. We get much more power from the dams than Idaho does. We've basically also been on the early arrival end of the fish. So we get them when they're still fat, silver, bright, juicy. We pick off a lot of them before they ever get home to you guys. And so it's not hard to see why in Washington, there's been kind of this, well, maybe someday attitude about, maybe someday something. Whereas in Idaho, it's a different story. They got less and they lost more. And if you want to talk about loss, let's talk about the First Nations. Let's talk about the tribes. I mean, that's a topic we'll return to in this conversation in much more depth. So one of the questions in the chat was, who are the natural partners in this thing? Well, certainly the tribal governments. I mean, this is something that as First Nation has been seeking, even when they had to go it alone forever. I mean, we joke about how long we've been following this as reporters. Well, let's talk intergenerationally, going back and back and back, to the people who were here long before us, who, never wanted those dams and don't want them now. So those are natural partners in this fight. And I know that Shannon Wheeler, who's the chairman for the Nez Perce Nation, did a lot of diplomacy with all of the other nations to help Simpson bring this to the table and provide backing from tribal nations, some of which also have sued against the status quo. So, I feel this thing is just being kind of on a delicate balance point right now. It's all going to depend on what comes out as a stimulus vehicle. If there really is a big package, really has money, to me, it would be amazing if people in the Northwest just let that go by, didn't give it a try. I don't know. It just seems like very likely there'll be some kind of something.
Thanks, Lynda, and Rocky and Eric. I'll just say a couple things quickly. If you've joined late, we're in the middle of a discussion with Lynda Mapes and Rocky Barker and Eric Barker, veteran Northwest journalists, talking about the salmon recovery, Lower Snake River, in the Simpson proposal that was released last month. I see some people have found the Q&A box, and I encourage you, if you've got questions, to put them in there, or you can, I think, put them in the chat box as well. We'll turn to those questions and answers in a moment. But first, I don't think the three of you have been together before in a single place like this, and I have a couple questions that I want to ask, but I also want to just create the space for the three of you to ask each other questions if you have them. So we can keep things sort of flexible, but I'll jump in unless one of you has a question for the other, to continue the conversation.
Well, I mean, I can't resist asking the two gentlemen, is he like shining me? I mean, I don't know. He seems super sincere and like he really means it. You know him better than I do. What's the deal?
I've known Mike for 35 years. But it was really the thing and I watched him change. He was very traditional about all of these kind of natural resource issues, had a very Republican stance on it, until he began trying to protect the Boulder White Clouds, which are a couple of mountain ranges in central Idaho that are really kind of the centerpiece of conservation in our state. The White Clouds, Castle Peak is in the center of the White Clouds, and C. Sanders got elected to being governor in 1970 on his efforts to save Castle Peak from a molybdenum mine. And so it carries so much lore with it. It's very much like the fish. It's a very sacred spot in the state. So Mike Simpson starts partnering up with the Idaho Conservation League in an effort to protect it around, right around, I think, 1999. Well, it took him until 2015 to get it done. And he just kept working at it. But as he was doing it, he stopped talking about it simply as this kind of a task to bring all these people together and make sure that all the folks in the local counties got what they were asking for in exchange for approving this. He really began to love wilderness. And every summer, he would hike up to Chamberlain Basin, this absolutely gorgeous spot in the middle of the state, right at the foot of Castle Peak. And I have to tell you, Castle Peak is the highest peak in Idaho you can't see from the road. So it's fairly interesting, but it just is a beautiful place. And so he kept going back every year. He thought he was going to save it. He was going to get this done by 2005. Well, first the Republicans killed it, then the Democrats killed it because, we can't let this Republican pass this bill. So he had to go through every possible way and he had to slowly pick it off. So when he got there in 2015, he was standing, he got there, he got unanimous vote in the House and the Senate. Now think about 2015. Think about how polarized this country is. In that, he was able to get everybody to vote for this thing. It just was an incredible task. And so he's done that. At the same time, he became one of the main sponsors for Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Good point.
So he understood that, there's a whole lot of other things that go along with this. And he watched what was going on in salmon all these years, and he decided to check it out. And that's when he went to Marsh Creek in 2019. And, just like I did in 1990, that was my first trip to Marsh Creek. And I'll tell you, it's an incredible place. It's in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area. It's this big giant meadow with this meandering stream running through it. And, in late July and August, it's full of Chinook, spring Chinook that came from the ocean. And it's just that when you see those fish and understand what that journey has been for them, first leaving as young juveniles, going all the way through all 8 dams and reservoirs, and about half of them are killed now in that. When I started covering it, it was a hell of a lot more because we have spent $17 billion on the fish passage on those dams, and it is arguably the best fish passage ever developed in the world. It's just not good enough because we've got 8 dams and still about half of those fish die even before they get to the ocean. So then they get in the ocean and they got all kinds of things out there they have to deal with. And they go all the way up to they're fished for in Alaska. Some of the fish from Idaho go all the way across to Japan and Kamchatka, mostly steelhead. And so then they come back up the river, through this very, modern, sophisticated, civilized river called the Columbia. And they go through all the dams, they go through past all the predators, the fishermen, and finally they come back, swim into the Salmon River after leaving the Snake, and then make that final journey up into a place like that. He saw that, I saw that, and that has been for, it's been my whole reality. He took my reality. I did a series in 2017, and he read that series cover to cover, and it told the whole story that we're covering right now. And that's when he started his program.
I think Rocky too, Representative Simpson kind of fundamentally sees himself as a problem solver, and find a bigger problem in the Northwest to solve this and a harder one. I think he just really likes to dive in and do that. And so I forget too, he's a politician. He's been in Washington for a long time, and if he's got a wilderness designation to his name, that's a big deal. If he pulls this off, this will be even a bigger deal. And politicians think about legacy, I think. So I'm sure he's thinking about that too. But fundamentally, I think he wants to solve a problem. I just talked to him recently about, some people. He has made the choice, and he recognizes that there's a choice. You have to pick salmon or dams. In his book, you can't have both. There's a lot of people in the region, especially around here, that haven't come to that conclusion. I asked him, we are seeing some people who are saying, well, if it's that choice, we pick the dams. And he told me he kind of appreciates their honesty, but he doesn't think most Idahoans agree with that. He thinks that most Idahoans want these fish around and he wants future generations to enjoy them and to experience the awe of them. And so I think that's what motivates him. I think he's sincere. And, you talked about 15 years for Boulder White Cloud. Well, he's been at this for only about 2 years. So if he, if he can hitch this onto a infrastructure bill and get it done, that'll be quite remarkable. If he can't, he's not going away. This idea is out there. It's sort of changed the debate for years. The salmon and dams debate has been it's been a legal debate, really, and it's lawsuits trying to and plaintiffs trying to convince the federal government to recommend that these dams have to be removed. Well, Representative Simpson he took the debate to another level, and as long as he's around and still pushing it, I don't think it sinks back to that other level. So it's in a new arena now, and we'll see.
So Lynn, I'm interested in so we've got this Republican from Idaho, and he's not the first Republican to at least talk about breaching dams. Senator Mike Crapo in 2009 said everything should be on the table. I haven't heard that from Democrats on the coast. We certainly were, it was interesting to see Governor Brown take a very strong position in support of Simpson. But I haven't heard that anywhere else. What's going on?
Right. Well, it's interesting to me too. I have to say I'm not very surprised by that, nor do I read that much into it. I think this is one of those situations where there's a lot going on behind the scenes and a lot going on under the surface and a lot of, what do you think? What do you think? Where are you? Where are you? There is definitely a lot of reaching out going on at all kinds of levels. And I think, I guess what I would say is stay tuned. I did notice that while you had the 3 Republican members of the Washington state delegation instantly, before it was even released, come out against this, that was not a surprise, nor was it a surprise to Congressman Simpson. He expected it. You had these very kind of kabuki theater releases coming from the Washington Democrats in the House and also in the Oregon, as a matter of fact, Democrats, senators, and congressmen. They encouraged a going forward of a conversation and a process. That's leaving a door open. It's not shutting it. And that's all you can say at this point. And as a matter of fact, that's not a small matter, I would say, because it has been an unallowed conversation for a long time, unallowed speech, like, in families where there are these things that nobody's allowed to talk about, even though everyone knows it's sitting right in the middle of the room. Well, this has kind of been our little like thing that we only do in the courtroom. So it'll be fascinating to me to see if it actually does start to break open and go somewhere. I think that one thing I want to note that happened this week, I haven't written about this yet, just kind of waiting to throw a little more string, but there was the inevitable this week, which was a press release from a lot of environmental groups coming out against the Simpson proposal. Groups like Wild Fish Conservancy, some others, about a dozen, saying it goes too far, that it's a big giveaway for polluters and the people who broke the system, you know, that it's going to eviscerate the protections in the environmental laws we have today, that it's going to shove money in the pockets of the people who've got rich killing the fish. You know, they're not buying it. So that's interesting. And I don't know where that will go from here. It's important to note, as in everything, nobody speaks with one voice. You can't talk about the environments, the environmentalists and their position on this bill. It's more complicated than that already. You've got environmentalists come out strongly against it, and others who worked hard behind the scenes to make this thing happen. So there's a new layer that came this week. I expected it, and boom, there it is. So that's the development this week. I haven't heard much from Indian country. I keep wondering if there'll be some big statement with, you know, a lot of signers on a letter or stepping up to a microphone saying this is our time. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering if that'll be the next thing. I'm not sure what will be the next thing. But look, it's salmon time, right? What is it here? March, mid-March? We're going to have another migration underway pretty soon.
Maybe I'll ask a question about that. You know, a motivator, according to the congressman's own words, is returning salmon to Idaho. Can any of you speak to the sort of long-term trends and conditions of salmon and steelhead? I think I'll just focus on the snake and what it looks like this year, what the predictions look like, and what that means for both the fish as well as the communities in Idaho that benefit from salmon and steelhead population.
Yeah, Joseph, it's you know, long term, it's bounced around quite a bit in the last couple of decades. We're really in a downtrend now, a bad spot. Fishing has really been curtailed for springers, especially on the Clearwater. Now, the Clearwater fish aren't listed. Steelhead has been way down the last 3 or 4 years. You know, we're not expecting to have enough hatchery returns to meet brood on the Clearwater this year, so there'll probably be no fishing on the Clearwater. There will be some fishing on the lower salmon, not a lot. I don't think things look very good for South Fork salmon or upper salmon. And that's been a trend for the last, you know, 3 or 4 years. We, you know, every once in a while, all the, you know, the sun and star, everything align, and we'll get a good return and good fishable numbers of hatchery fish. But, you know, a guide I talk to frequently who's kind of stepped out on this calls those unicorn years, and you can't bank on them. Unfortunately, you can't bank on the down years more often if you're a betting person.
Thanks, Eric.
I think one of the saddest things that happened in my research recently was actually reading some of the government documents about the returns to the Snake Basin. So the NOAA scientists created a gigantic biological opinion that looked at the status quo operations of the dams, which came to the conclusion that they did not pose jeopardy to the salmon. But if you actually read that document, which I did with regard to the Snake River fish, I mean, it is a roll call of the lost. These populations of Chinook salmon in the Snake Basin that are just barely hanging on. They're hanging on by a thread. Marsh Creek, Bear Creek. And very sadly, a lot of these creeks, the names of the creeks they evoke what's been lost as well. You know, as we've lost these landscapes, we're losing these fish. So it's very stark. The ocean is also posing very difficult conditions for these fish. There's been some very dire findings by NOAA scientists as well. recently published, I wrote about this too, about the ocean, that the sea surface warming is projected to be so threatening in the next, decades that these fish, they won't even make it to come back and challenge the dams. They'll croak in the ocean because the warming sea surface temperatures disrupt the food web that these salmon depend on. Remember, these freshwater fish, they go out to the ocean, their job is to get fat fast. They need to grow big. That's where they turn into these magnificent animals, and they've got to do it in 4 years. And if the food web is upside down, they don't make it. So, when I read that paper, I thought, well, what's that mean? Is it time to just like lights out? Why bother, right? They're just going to croak in the ocean. Why bother? Why are we even talking about these dams? Why are you people bothering me? But honestly, that is not what the scientists came away with. Actually, it was quite the opposite. Brian Burke and others passionately said, no, don't mishear us. What we're saying is that if we have this much challenge in the ocean, it is all the more critical that we look at every life stage of these animals. They have got to survive the river coming out to be in better shape to deal what they have to deal with as they grow in the ocean. And then furthermore, they have to be able to have a reasonable passage back to the spawning ground. So this is what's challenging about salmon. It's just like the orcas, it all counts. You don't get to like pick a stage. Oh, we'll fix that and everything else doesn't matter. It all counts. And this for us in the Northwest is our charge and our challenge. If we want these animals into the far future, we have to look at all of it. The headwaters, the riparian, the estuary, the ocean. You don't get to just like pick one and just assume they can just like deal with the rest. So, you ask, how's it looking for snake salmon? It's dire. You can't say it any other way. There's the exception. This is interesting to me. The Nez Perce tribe has been raising false Chinook in their hatchery. I've seen these fish. They're gigantic, big hatchery fish. They figured out a way to raise hatchery fish that actually come back. This is not usually how it goes, sadly. And those false Chinook are doing pretty well. So that's good. And, the whales do eat them. But here's the thing, you also don't get to pick your one population and beef it up and that's enough. No, these whales need to eat every day of the year. They need to eat hundreds of pounds of salmon, each whale, every day of the year throughout their migratory range. So that means, go make one run of salmon, make it healthier. That's not going to get it done. You have to not only bring back salmon from a wide area where these whales forage, you may even have to reintroduce some populations that are just gone because we've lost a tremendous amount of diversity of these salmon runs, these Chinook salmon runs, these precious fish. We've lost so much diversity that that's another reason why these whales are having to look harder, swim longer, go without meals. And you can't expect them to do well under the circumstances. You certainly can't expect them to bear young. I say one more thing, I'll be quiet, which is that the northern residents, they're the same animal, they just live in a different place. These are also obligate salmon eaters. They don't eat seals, they eat salmon, just like the southern residents, but they're further up north. They're feeding up in Southeast Alaska and northern Vancouver Island. So they're getting the southern residents fish, number one, before they come down south and into the Columbia. So they're getting first crack. And they're also feeding on a wider variety and more numerous populations of fish. So they've got better diet, the water is cleaner and it's quieter. Well, guess what? They're doing fine. I mean, if you look at their growth curve as population, it looks like this. If you look at the southern residents, it looks like that. Fish.
That diversity that Lynda talks about for salmon is really a critical issue that we really haven't. From when I look at the salmon issue, I of course it begins for me up in Idaho, and with climate change going the direction it is, Idaho's high elevation spawning habitat may end up being, the critical last resort, Noah's Ark, so to speak, as we go through the climate bottleneck that we face in front of us right now. But on top of that, we've got everything she talked about in terms of reintroduction. this gene pools, all of these gene pools we have all over, including down places like the Russian River, including Japan. You know, in Japan, they don't even count their wild fish. They've given up on their wild fish, and it's a travesty. And I've been over in Kamchatka in Russia and watched ice. I was on a place called Kurilsky Lake. There were 3 million sockeye in the lake that year when I was there about 30 years ago. And, you know, so we're all in this together, so to speak. And but we all have to start someplace. And in this case, we have, you know, we just spent $17 billion since I started covering this back in 1990. But think about it, that 17 billion mostly was spent so that we could keep those 4 dams. That we would not have had to have spent all of that money. If they had made the decision in 2001 to start taking out those dams, we took those dams out by 2010, we'd be in a completely different place right now. And I would tell you, we would not have spent anywhere near the money that we've spent. But all that said, we have, and we will again. We're going to continue. So when people look at this $32 billion price tag, which I also think it's high, but it's high because the way Simpson is proposing it is he's asked people what they want and need, and some of these folks have given him some numbers, and that includes everybody, and it's a wish list. But right now here in Idaho, and you tell me, Eric, there aren't a lot of people looking very happily at that wish list, are they?
No, I don't think so. There's not a lot of Daryl Olsons in Idaho that I've seen. You know, one of the hardest problems to solve is the shipping problem. You know, you talk to the power people, they've got serious reservations about this plan, but they're engaged. They're talking about it. You know, they're kind of like, well, maybe if we did this, hey, maybe if that lawsuit moratorium were 50 years instead of 35 years, or maybe if it extended to state water quality standards, that'd be cool. I'm not seeing that kind of engagement from the shippers. It's a tough problem to solve. You know, there is a lot of wheat going on rail, and there's, you know, the amount of products going downriver has certainly declined over the last couple of decades, but there's still a hell of a lot of wheat going down that river, and farmers on a big part of the Palouse and a big part of the Camas Prairie rely on it. So they're kind of dug in a little bit. You know, just this week, Simpson's folks released a couple of just sort of examples of what all this money could be used for, how it could be used to solve the shipping problems. And there's some really interesting things in there. My colleague Elaine Williams is going to be writing about that. And we'll see if that turns any heads or not. You know, I don't know. That seems to be the group, the transportation group, the ports seem to be the ones that are really dug in on this issue.
I want to jump in. No, excuse me. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to ask one question, and then I want to turn to the questions that have come in from the audience, because there's lots of them, and I'm hoping that we won't get to all of them, but I would like to hope to attempt to get to a bunch of them. My question is, you know, the headlines that were in the papers of your articles really focused on Lower Snake, dam removal and river restoration. But that's only sort of in terms of dollars, that's a pretty small figure compared to the overall package. I'm wondering if you have any particular and maybe brief observations or items that are part of this package, components of this package that are worth, that aren't related to dam removal necessarily, that are worth, that would be good for our listeners to understand is sort of part of the package to help. I mean, this is a comprehensive package. It's got application across the region, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, in various ways. just curious what might jump out from your standpoint in terms of non-dam removal investments or opportunities.
Well, I mean,
Well, I think,
go ahead,
Go ahead,
Rocky. Go on.
I was going to say, one of the things that is doesn't automatically make people think that it's tied to the snake dams is our water quality money. In this proposal is one heck of a lot of money for water quality cleanup, for watershed councils to do, work with farmers to stop runoff, to work with dairy farmers to manage manure in a different way. And so those water quality, we've got several $1 billion right there that is not automatically tied to this. Lewiston would get hundreds of millions of dollars for fixing up its the shoreline. Right now, it's the river is hidden behind these big giant dikes, and when it is lowered, they're going to get their river back. But it's kind of will be a mess unless they spend a lot of money to do that. There is also all of this money for the Tri-Cities. They have a national lab, Battelle National Lab. He's proposed a national lab specifically for battery research, and have some of that money spent in Lewiston as well. Then there is all these other dams left in the region that are not necessarily covered by this. He's extending out their licenses for the private dams for 35 years, I believe. And he also would have some money to, if they want to take those dams out for voluntarily, he's helping them do for money to do that. And that sounds kind of strange, but Lynda and I sat and watched a few dams come out on the Elwha a few years ago, and I watched a dam come out on in 1999, the Edwards Dam on the Kennebec River. There's been about 1,500 dams nationwide that have come out, many of them voluntarily, because they no longer are economic.
Lynda, 1 minute, and then Eric, 1 minute, and then we'll turn to questions.
I want to talk about power. So, here's the thing that right now Bonneville is struggling to pay the costs of dealing with the environmental damage caused by these dams. It's become a larger and larger task for them. And the Simpson proposal would just take that away. It's you don't even do that anymore. We're going to give it to the states and the tribes. We're going to create a completely new structure for managing these programs. Not only that, but the proposal would throw a whole bunch of money at Bonneville to pay for water that it spills over the dams rather than sending through turbines. Why do we do that? We do it because it helps a little bit mimic the spring freshet that these fish evolved to ride to the sea. But of course, if you're spilling water for fish, you're not running it through turbines, which means they're not making money. Under the Simpson proposal, they would get quite a lot of money to replace that power that's lost for the sake of the fish. They would also get money, a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars, to pay for for the power that's lost if you were to unplug these dams and buy replacement power. Furthermore, Bonneville would get, and not only Bonneville, but entities would get money to modernize, optimize the grid. There's a lot of transmission issues right now. There's too many electrons try to get where they need to go, so to speak, and money needs to be spent to make the grid more efficient and just function better, not only now, today, but with the increasingly challenging mix of renewable energy. It's really a miraculous system, honestly. It's tuned very finely to dispatch power instantly as needed, and the balance that requires is really quite exquisite. And as you bring in these different energy sources, it's challenging. They're having more issues with trying to deal with a blend of energy sources. it's very interesting to me to think about what it could mean for Bonneville's stability and also the future performance of a changing energy world here in the Northwest, if we really had the money to seize that and do some experimentation as well, really start trying to figure out all kinds of different storage options for water that aren't big dams, but are other sorts of things, small nuclear. I mean, it's all on the table. We used to talk about this like this was in some far, Jetsons future, and it's all happening right now. So the idea of having money to really seize that here in the Northwest with all the assets that we have in the universities and the PNNL labs and the presence of a robust public power system, which don't forget, I mean, that's a unique gift. I'm from New York. We burned coal back there and it was all private utilities, Con Edison. For profit, it's a different deal out here. And it was started with a different mission, which was to deliberately to push back against that industrialist monopoly power of the Northeast. The whole idea out here was Woody Guthrie, power to the people. And it's easy to forget that today especially in the context of this conversation. But it's a mission that's worth re-embracing and reclaiming. How do we, as a region, take advantage of the miracle of this river for the people and to actually have it deliver riches for everybody? The fish, the entire world of animals that depend on those fish. I mean, it's not just us, for heaven's sakes. I mean, I think one of the single most interesting papers I read about what's happened to the ecology of the Columbia Basin because of the steep decline of these fish was the soil and the streams. They don't have the nutrition coming back to them anymore in the bodies of these fish. I mean, the cratering of the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that these fish used to bring back that fed the soil, fed the land, fed the streams is staggering. And what it's meant is that even in years where we get those big returns of fish and they put out a lot of eggs and we get a big hatch, you don't have productivity in the system anymore. It can't sustain a big hatch of fingerlings. I mean, I just find that so sad. And it travels all through the food chain. So, wealth, this is the original wealth of the region, the salmon. This is the old money, as, Chairman Wheeler of the Nez Perce Nation tribe says, and it's a beautiful way to think about it. And so I see this present moment as an opportunity for the Northwest to kind of rethink what does wealth look like in this coming age that we're moving into faster, I think, than anyone thought, between climate change, energy change. Let's face it, a species extinction crisis that's now only extended into the mammals, the whales. So it's a moment, it really is. And I'll be very interested to see if we seize it, because honestly, it's something that you haven't seen societies do, where they take a look at the natural wealth and step back to make space for it. Will we do that? And will we, in so doing, create a platform for prosperity for future generations and chart a destiny that really looks at the Columbia Basin as a place of wealth for all that is positioned for a changing future? That's to me kind of where we're at. What's going to happen next, I couldn't say, but I'm pretty clear about where we stand.
Thanks, Lynda. Eric?
Yep. Boy, there's a hell of a lot of facets of this. Rocky and Lynda covered it pretty good. For Simpson, I think rescuing BPA is a huge part of it. They face some really strong economic headwinds. A lot of the cooperatives, the power cooperatives will be renewing their contracts in a few years. Of course, they're looking at the cheaper power they can buy on the open market compared to Bonneville's price. So that's a huge deal. This would also sort of reorder a lot of the fish in power systems in the Northwest. It would take Bonneville out of its role as deciding where all this, the $17 billion over the past decades have been spent. And that would be, that authority would go to a council of states and tribes who would kind of take that over and decide how to spend that money. And same with the Power Council, they would also kind of lose that role. So it really kind of just reshuffles the deck for the Northwest in a lot of ways. more related to dam breaching. There's also, a lot of money for tourism promotion for the Tri-Cities, for Lewiston, Spokane. And one of the things I'm intrigued about, if the dams were to come out, is there would be a national recreation area between the Lewiston and Tri-Cities, following the Snake River, which is sort of no man's land. Not a lot of people spend much time down in that area. There's not many people down there. There's roads into it in a few spots, but it's mostly kind of remote without being anything like wilderness. So that would be really interesting. But yeah, if you haven't looked at the proposal, I would go to his website and do it. Take a look. There's it's impossible almost to remember all the different facets of it.
Right. Thanks. SOS has a resource page that's on our homepage that people can visit and get a sense of the various links to additional information. Also, comments and letters and feedback from represented policymakers from tribes, from other entities as well. So there's a bunch of links and information there. So I'm going to try to get to some questions. We're going to go over. I hope that works for the three of you and the people that are listening in. And I'm going to try to sort of ask a question, and then one of you can take a stab at answering it. If your question doesn't get asked, feel free to follow up, at least with me or Carrie afterwards, and we can try to be helpful. A question from Gene. I think it's a he, is asking about water temperatures, and is what would in one of yours view, whoever wants to respond, what impact would restoring the lower Snake River have on water temperatures in those 4 reservoirs today? 30 seconds.
Yeah, so they actually release cold water from below Dworshak Dam above the lower Snake River dams now to do cooling in the Snake, in the Columbia in the summertime. And what's so distressing about this is that works pretty well for a while, but by the time you get to Pasco, the cooling effect of that water release is already gone. So let's pretend for a moment all 4 lower Snake River dams are gone. The modeling I've seen from the US EPA, shockingly, is that there is so much heat baked into the river and in climate change that we've already bought into, that even if you took all the dams out, you would still have, all of them, all main stem dams, Columbia and Snake, you'd still have temperature issues in the lower river in the later summer for weeks at a time. Even that wouldn't totally fix it. So this temperature problem is very serious. It's very real. In bad years, today, you see fish dying by the thousands before they even get halfway up the river. They're not anywhere near home. So temperature is very serious, and taking out all 4 lower Snake River dams, even that isn't the silver bullet for the temperature problem. That's how bad the climate warming situation is, but it certainly helps. Less is more in this case. But that's how grave the temperature problem is.
Absolutely, but I want to add too, the creativity, that the fact that Dworshak right now, Dworshak is not completely dedicated to cooling the river. No. I would think that we should, and I've pushed this. Why aren't we running Dworshak solely for cooling? I think we will in the future, because it is provide that cool water for a longer part of the year. But maybe there are other places like Grand Coulee that we can be releasing water in a different way from different places to try to affect that. These have not been even considered up to this point. And I think those are the kind of things that we're going to need a lot of creative thinking to get us through the warming rivers.
I just want to make a brief follow-up point to what Rocky just said, which is this is exactly the kind of thing that has the Daryl Olsons of the world losing sleep. There's breaching, and there's virtual breaching, where the dams are in place still, but there's so many conditions put on their operation for the survival of the fish as we keep going into more challenging warming conditions, that ultimately you're getting so little out of them. What are you really getting out of them? And the costs just keep going up and up, and you're not getting anything by way of help for the users. So that's that kind of scenario that you just drew of, well, more water for fish. Well, those aren't electrons, and it's not growing crops up for your people up there in Idaho. So that's exactly the scenario that has people thinking, well, we can do it and we can make the deal, or we can wait for a judge to do it. And they might not take out the dams, but they could make the operation of them so restricted and so onerous that the economic benefits that we think we're holding on to are going to evaporate anyway. So that I just wanted to point out that what you just said is exactly the coming future, and only a tiny piece of it. This isn't going to get easier no matter what.
That's right.
Question from Martha. Returning to the issue of politics, are you all aware of any Oregon or Washington congressional representatives who are ready to work with Simpson to get this proposal moving?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule any of them out at this point. The Democrats have not, put out a press release saying, let's go, but neither have they said, go away. I mean, I think they are talking, and, I just think it's a little too soon to handicap that. I'm certain that those conversations are underway, and I wouldn't rule any of those people out at this time.
But I would say this to our audience. You need to talk to your Democratic representatives and senators, and you have to make it fairly clear that this is no longer the debate that's been there before. What Mike Simpson is saying is that if we don't take these dams out, the snakefish go extinct. Do you care about that, or don't you?
Rocky once again makes a great point. Long ago, before I was a reporter, I worked in a congressional office, and you know what? My job was to answer the mail. And it was such a huge job, and it was so important. The congressman I worked for, Byron Dorgan from North Dakota, later a senator, it was so important that we answered those letters because it was the lifeline to the constituents, and that has not changed. You'd be surprised how the impact of an actual personal letter that you wrote and put a stamp on and sent to your elected representative, either in the state or a governor or a congressman or a senator. And I don't mean a form letter, and I don't mean a postcard, and I don't mean an email. I don't mean any of this robo stuff. I mean kitchen table, legal pad, pen, legible, and an envelope and a stamp. I mean, that so stands out. I mean, how do you react these days when you get a personal letter? It's like, wow, somebody actually wrote me a letter. Well, don't think they're any different. And if they get a lot of letters saying, you people are nuts, don't touch this, they'll hear that. Or if you say, finally, would you please get cracking? They'll hear that. But if you don't say anything, that's what they'll hear. Oh, they don't really care. It doesn't really matter. Nobody's paying attention. So, this really is real. It's not, it is, if you actually do care either for it or against it, it's very important to say so. And people do notice that, especially if you write it yourself. And you use your own words and you take the time to send an actual real letter.
An attendee, Holly, sort of asked this question: who do we reach out to? Who do we talk to? I'll just chime in as the advocate on the call and say Northwest governors, Northwest senators, and Northwest House members are the people who are sort of in the driver's seat on making these decisions as elected officials. And so I'm not sure, Holly, for example, what state you live in, but I think those are the targets. Governors and members of Congress in your state need to hear from you. And SOS has alerts online. I think Linda's point is an excellent one. Phone calls and letters are more impactful than emails, but there's various ways to make comment. Let's see. Lynda, quick question. What's the title of your book that's coming out in June?
Orca. So creative. It's called Orca, Shared Waters, Shared Home. And it comes out June 1st from the Mountaineers Books and the Seattle Times. It's a co-publication. And you can actually order it now. If I was an enterprising writer, I'd instantly have that like order now link and I'd put it in the chat. And I will be putting information out about that. I super will. I'm very excited about the book. It's a labor of love. It truly is. Blood, sweat, tears, the whole bit. It'll be out in June. Thank you for asking.
Someone asked about, how do we as citizens push forward on Simpson's proposal? And how can we fight to get the dams removed sooner than 2030, 2032? I think that's, I'll just chime in. What Mr. Simpson put forward was a proposal, a concept, and I think he invited input from people. And of course, as our speakers have highlighted, the key dance partners are members of Congress, his colleagues, but all of us have a role to play, and as we've discussed in providing input, I think that's input you can simply provide to your Congress people. Urge them to get involved in the conversation and help move this forward in some fashion. Someone asked a little bit about, can you talk a little bit about the Snake River Basin economy? And this could be a long conversation, but I'm looking at Rocky and Eric in particular. Just some quick reflections on that economy and maybe the role of fish or lack of fish in that geography as part of that.
Well, I'll start off. I mean, think about it. I mean, Idaho, of course, what are we famous for? Potatoes. And where do they grow them? In the in the Snake River, on top of the Snake River Plain, which is and the Snake River Plain aquifer starts and right on the edge of Yellowstone, goes all the way to just south of Boise. And so that whole area of Magic Valley is all kinds of crops, but primarily it's potatoes and corn and barley and wheat, and the wheat, of course, goes up into the lochs, into the area around Eric, which is a big, is a wheat, but it's just on the, it's kind of moves on out of the, into, to the north of that, but then we also still have, right now this year, we had a reasonable, not a good one, but at least some steelhead run, and Riggins had a really good year this year. And it really meant a lot to their economy. And they have this vision that and in fact, they all stand together. The places like Riggins, like Orofino, like Kamei, like Salmon, Chalice, and Stanley, all are standing together trying to restore that abundance of salmon and steelhead. So they do play a big part of that economy. That's a rural economy. The timber industry is not as strong as it used to be, and there are a whole lot of reasons for that. But there is, and our primary driver of Boise's economy now is the tech industry. So we've got quite a bit of tech companies growing all the time. We're kind of like the Silicon Valley, and the companies are coming up all the time. So, or I should say Seattle.
There's a couple of questions about the transportation system. Eric, you've addressed this a little bit. One question references this report of each barge being subsidized about $25,000 per barge load. Can you confirm? Can you react to that figure? Do you know what the subsidy levels are?
Off the top of my head, I can't confirm that figure, but yeah, there's a hell of a lot of money that goes into maintaining the system, to maintaining the dams, dredging the shipping channel. Just like highways, the water transportation system is managed by the government, and the government pays a lot of money. So it's, I think, not wrong to look at it as a subsidy or something the government helps with. But as far as this specific per barge number, I've reported that before, but I can't pull it, out of my mind right now.
Can a related question, how many barges pass from Lewiston each year? Any idea?
No. The number I don't know. I want to say, what is it? I just saw the number on Simpson's website about. Well, I don't know. That's also a number I can look up, but I can't pull out of my mind right now.
If you do and follow up, I could try to connect with that person if that person follows up with me as well. The other figure I've heard, Eric, Rocky, Linda, is that of the barging that goes on the Columbia Snake system, if you want to call it that, 95% of it occurs on the lower Columbia River, which would be unimpacted by dam removal on the lower Snake, and that there's a small number that's important and would need to be replaced, but in terms of the overall impact on barging in the lower Columbia Snake system, it's not significant. It's 5%.
That's a really important point. Everyone talks about this as a system, and it is a system, but let's face it, you're not affecting the lower part of the system. You'd be taking out the 4 dams that take you all the way to Lewiston, but Pasco would suddenly be a booming port. So I've been a little surprised that we haven't heard people at Pasco seizing on this as the economic opportunity that Congressman Simpson wants to make it. He would like to plow a lot of money into Pasco to create this hub, this transportation hub. And, it's absolutely the case that most of the goods get on the river there now and lower in the river. There is, of course, some shipping on the lower Snake waterway, but honestly, when I travel around there, how many barges do I see? Not very many. I mean, right. And I know that's true for you too as well. And, you go by the Port of Lewiston and it's a pretty quiet place. And, and I don't say that with any criticism, it's just a fact. I mean, the point is the dream of the open river, which is what they called it, and the idea that this was going to create this massive inland shipping port, commerce just didn't develop that way. Instead, it's double stacked railroad cars going to Chicago. People aren't clamoring to go to Lewiston and encounter Route 12, this kind of like goat track through the hills. It's a relatively isolated port. And so commerce just hasn't developed that way. And furthermore, there's been the whole shutdown of the container industry, and more commerce out of Lewiston even has moved to highway and rail. So Eric, that story better than I do, but I do think it's very important whenever this gets talked about to know what you're talking about. Are you talking about the whole river, or are you talking about the reality from Pasco inland? What is there? So, and similarly with power, the 4 dams generate about 5% of the region's power. And I know Bonneville always wants to say, oh, but we need every bit so that we can have this great flexibility and dispatchability and so on and so forth. But look, I mean, the energy world has so many more resources available now, and kinds of resources that didn't even exist back when these dams were built. And that was not that long ago. I mean, Lower Granite was finished in '76, the inlandmost dam. So it is a different world, both in terms of how commerce moves and in terms of energies, both supply and generation options. And so it's just important when this gets talked about to recognize you're talking about a piece of a larger system. But the brilliance of the Simpson proposal and the Simpson pitch, if you will, was to stop debating whether these 4 dams matter and fighting over that, which is what I've been covering for I don't know how long. And I frankly got so tired of it, I stopped. His brilliant masterstroke in my mind was to say, they matter. In fact, they super matter. They matter so much that it's going to cost $32 billion to replace what they do. That was different. To say, instead of fighting over whether they matter, let's accept that they do matter, and let's find out how they matter, and let the people to whom they matter tell us what they need rather than let us tell them how we're going to fix it. That was very sensitive and smart and different. And it certainly got everyone's attention. It certainly got mine.
Couple more questions, and then I think we're going to conclude. And I want to just give you a moment to think beforehand. I'll just, each of you could sort of make a closing or final comments or final thoughts, whatever you want to share. Two more questions. One that hasn't been raised yet by you all, and it has to do with the new political landscape in Washington, D.C. Any murmurs that you all are hearing about, the administration as a partner for solutions around salmon, justice, clean energy, this Simpson proposal?
Well, I'll
Right.
say, I think a lot of people found it really interesting. One, you have Deb Allen, a Native American from New Mexico, heading interior. And even more so when it comes to the Snake River is that Jamie Pinkham, a member of the Nez Perce tribe, and most recently the executive director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, is getting a high-level job in the Army Corps of Engineers. I assume that's, that the Biden administration knew who they were hiring when they hired him, and I assume he has said to me that he'll carry out what the administration wants to do, but certainly I would think he would be an advocate for salmon from the inside. So I think that's pretty interesting. But beyond that, we've heard that from Simpson that yes, the administration is aware of this proposal. How seriously they're taking it, I don't know. I haven't heard that.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean,
I've heard some
there's just
things. Go ahead.
it's a new day. I mean, every day, another appointment, another aspect of just how new a day it is comes out, and it's obviously very significant. There's no question about that.
The whole Black Lives Matter movement of last year, which was really for many of us, a transformation of the way we thought about the issues like this. And I also want to point out that absolutely fabulous series that Lynda did on Nez Perce, which I believe has raised the level of environmental justice as a part of this debate. It's, this debate has changed so much in just the last year, with first Lynda and the tribes really becoming a major voice in this new elected government. But second, as Lynda said, Mike Simpson saying, let's quit arguing about this stuff. Let's just pay them and move on. And that is so I think there is opportunity here, but it's going to take. I thought it was interesting what Lynda said about so far the tribes. I know I've seen the letter they've written to the congressional delegation from the Nez, led by the Yakima tribe. So they're all engaged, but I guess they're still hoping that they'll do it through the normal way that they work with their congressional delegations. I think we'll watch. If they get to a point where we start seeing them coming out and on their own and speaking up, I think that will mean that they haven't yet gotten enough indication back that they might be moving.
Maybe that's the final question. There's just been a number of questions that have come through, just giving you all a moment to expand on the tribal dimensions of this, or what you're hearing from your contacts in Indian country beyond what's been said. And anything to share or add?
Well, there are a couple of different things going on. You have seen several tribal nations join in the lawsuit brought by environmental and fisheries groups against the status quo. So that legal action is ongoing, and so that's important. That's a treaty rights litigation position, and it's a powerful position. I mean, these are the supreme law of the land. I mean, Shannon Wheeler always likes to bring that up in every conversation, and he's right. You read the Constitution and there it is, that there will be no abrogation of those promises, period. And the other thing he likes to say is a deal's a deal. Well, how do you argue with that? And so, that's just very powerful medicine. And furthermore, I think it's very true the way Rocky put it, which is that the quiet that we're hearing right now is a very, very loud quiet. There's a lot going on. And in my own experience, things start to come out into the open only when they're not working out in the quiet. That's when people start to call people like me and say, hey. And so it's a process. It's a process, and it's a people process, and it takes time, and it's a diplomacy that is very, very sophisticated. And I think right now I've deliberately not come back with a lot of follow-up stories. I kind of felt like I wanted to push it out there and just kind of walk away for a while and let people talk, let them talk. And I won't do that forever, but it kind of feels like the appropriate place right now. And on the tribal side of it, there is a protocol of relationship, and those relationships, I'm sure right now are being tested.
Eric, any final thoughts on tribal issues, but more generally? I think we're
just on tribal issues. I think as Lynda said, I think Chairman Wheeler and the Nez Perce Tribe are working pretty hard on this, and they've been a leader for a long, long time on the salmon issue. They've been in the courtroom. They've been a leader, but on the ground too. I mean, they operate hatcheries. They have a huge fisheries program. They're responsible for the surge in fall Chinook, largely above Lower Granite Dam and in the Snake River and then the Clearwater River. They have a coho run that they reestablished after it was functionally extinct in the Clearwater River, and now we're doing the same thing in the Lewiston River in Oregon. So they've been a leader for a long time, not only in providing fisheries, but in sort of pushing for a restored Lower Snake River, and I expect them to continue to do so. And as far as where Simpson proposal goes, I we're watching. We'll see. The window appears to be pretty short, between now and fall for infrastructure package. So things could move really fast.
I also want to remind people that in 1990, when all of this began, it was the Shoshone-Bannock tribes that sued the NOAA, or didn't sue. They actually asked for an endangered species listing for sockeye, for Snake River sockeye, which began this entire process. And so, the tribes have been deeply engaged in this, and there's also tribes above, in our case, above Hell's Canyon, the Shoshone Paiute, who go all the way into Nevada, who are hoping, as a part of this package, would get money for reintroduction and trying to get fish up above them. The same in places like above Grand Coulee. So goes all the way into Montana in terms of tribal interest. So that's, and I will tell you, the tribal leaders I've spoken with who have talked directly with Simpson, they are convinced he's real, and they are ready to march with him wherever he wants to go.
Thanks, Rocky. Any final concluding thoughts from any of you, either one of you?
I guess I would just want to emphasize how different this moment is. I've been watching this for a long time now, and this really is different in terms of what's on the table, who's at the table, who's in position to do something if they want to. This really is worth paying attention to. If you've got a dog in this fight, now's the time to get the dog off the leash. it's time. It really is Judgment Day, as Daryl Olson said. You know, it's a real big question for the region, and it will affect whatever happens for generations to come. So it is a good time to pay attention. Read up, read in, get involved on either side. It's very different. It's a different time.
Rocky?
You know, in 1997, my editor came to me and said, do you think we could make a case that taking out those 4 dams in Washington would be good for Idaho? And I said, well, I don't know. I think so. I could, he says, all right, you have 30 days. I want you to go out and research this. And I came back and I wrote a long memo. And, you know, we've talked about so many of the issues that we had in that time. And I'm basically talking about the subsidies and talking about and we ended up saying we could take out the dams cheaper than keeping them in place. And, you know, when we did that, it blew up, you know, it really was a big, you know, wave across the whole country, frankly. And I'm pretty excited to have been a part of that whole thing. But that argument has essentially died. And that's the point. Now, we're not arguing that same old argument. That argument's been dead for at least 5 years. And now it's time to start a new discussion.
Thanks, Rocky. Eric?
Well, yeah, I'll just echo what Rocky and Lynda said. And I think Lynda said it's a new day. And I think Congressman Simpson, with this proposal, as I said earlier, he's kind of changed the conversation. He's elevated it to a new arena. So yeah, it's a new day, and I think the argument is changed probably for a long time. As long as Simpson is around and pushing it'll be at that higher level. So we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Eric.
We'll follow it.
I know there's more high quality reporting coming from these 3 journalists in the weeks and months ahead. I want to thank the 3 of you for a really great discussion. I was excited to begin it, and you guys have just been fantastic. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank everyone who's attended. We had great turnout, great questions. I want to apologize that we weren't able to begin to get at all the questions. I'd encourage you to reach out to me or Carrie at Save Our Wild Salmon, and you know, we'll be as helpful as we can if those questions persist for you and you want to continue the conversation. Beyond that, just want to thank everyone again for a great evening. Wish we could keep talking, but I think we're coming up on 2 hours. And just appreciate everyone's time. So thank you all. Have a great evening, and we'll be in touch.